Every nation, just like every individual, operates on paradigms. Beliefs, habits, and deep-rooted strategies guide decisions. But here's the truth: paradigms can be shifted. Today, we are not just talking about foreign policy. We are talking about the power of conscious alignment, about how the choices of one superpower ripple across the destinies of millions. Perception shapes. This isn't just a clever phrase. It's a fundamental truth in international relations and even more so in human behavior. The United States, like any major power, acts not solely based on facts or realities on the ground, but on how those realities are interpreted, framed, and filtered through historical, political, and strategic lenses. The alliance with Pakistan was never just about geography or security. It was about how Pakistan was perceived at pivotal moments in time. During the Cold War, Pakistan was viewed as a valuable counterweight to Soviet influence in the region. That perception shaped decades of aid, arms deals, and diplomatic support. Meanwhile, India was seen as a non-linked power, leaning toward the Soviet Union, and that too shaped policy. These weren't fixed realities. They were evolving perceptions that directed billions of dollars, shifted military balances, and created long-lasting consequences. In the realm of diplomacy, perception is power. It defines friend and foe, ally and threat. The way a country sees another determines how it engages, how much it invests, and how much it trusts. And here's the deeper truth. Perception is rarely based purely on objective truth. It is informed by narratives, media portrayal, lobbyist influence, leadership dynamics, and often outdated beliefs. The image of Pakistan as a necessary strategic partner against terror has been hardwired into U.S. policy circles. Despite shifting ground realities, that perception remains embedded in the institutional psyche. So decisions continue to be made not based on what Pakistan is today, but what it has represented in the minds of policymakers for decades. This is where the disconnect begins to form. India, rising in influence, technology, and diplomacy, expects a relationship based on mutual respect, democratic values, and strategic alignment. But when U.S. policy appears to favor Pakistan in ways that undermine Indian interests, whether through military aid, lenient stances on terrorism, or diplomatic indulgence, it sends a message. That message is interpreted by India not as a neutral balancing act, but as a continued misreading of regional priorities. And once again, perception begins to shape the response. Indian policymakers in turn start questioning U.S. reliability. Public sentiment begins to shift. Media narratives frame the alliance in terms of skepticism rather than trust, all because original perceptions were never reevaluated or recalibrated in light of new realities. The lesson is clear. Perception is not static, and if it is left unchallenged, it becomes policy inertia. Policies built on outdated views create friction in a world that has already moved on. The perception of Pakistan as an indispensable ally may have made sense during the Cold War or post-9/11 era, but the region's dynamics have changed. India's emergence as a global power, its alignment with the U.S. on critical issues like the Indo-Pacific, technology, and climate change, demands a shift in how relationships are weighed. If perception isn't updated, policies become relics of another time, incapable of supporting present-day goals. And this goes even deeper than geopolitics. It reflects a universal principle. People and nations often act not based on what is, but on what they believe to be true. Change begins when perception is questioned, when beliefs are tested against current truth. The most powerful transformation, whether in an individual or an international policy, starts when there's a willingness to see with new eyes, to challenge the comfortable narrative, to admit that what once worked may no longer serve. The United States stands at a threshold, not just between two nations, but between two paradigms. It can continue to operate from old perceptions, or it can lead by choosing to see the region as it is now. Conflict is a mirror of misalignment. In the world of international relations, as in the world of human behavior, conflict rarely arises from surface-level disagreements. It emerges from deeper fractures, differences in vision, values, intentions, and unresolved historical patterns. When alliances and strategic relationships begin to produce tension rather than trust, it is often because there is a fundamental misalignment at the core. The case of the United States' dual engagement with Pakistan and India exemplifies this principle. For decades, the U.S. has attempted to balance its interests in South Asia by maintaining strong relationships with both nations, but the outcomes have frequently produced misunderstanding, diplomatic strain, and geopolitical conflict. The reason for this is not simply a matter of flawed execution. It is because the strategy itself often rests on contradictory objectives. At its core, U.S. policy has attempted to be everything to everyone. With Pakistan, the relationship has largely been transactional, rooted in military cooperation, intelligence sharing, and short-term strategic goals, especially in the context of Afghanistan and the global war on terror. With India, the partnership has leaned toward shared democratic values, economic collaboration, and long-term alignment in the Indo-Pacific. On paper, both relationships serve American interest, but when examined closely, they often pull in opposite directions. Supporting Pakistan militarily while courting India economically and politically creates an imbalance that neither nation fully trusts. It becomes a classic example of a policy trying to walk two divergent paths, resulting in neither being fully satisfied and both questioning the U.S. commitment. Misalignment breeds doubt, doubt erodes trust, and where trust is absent, conflict naturally fills the vacuum. India, watching billions in U.S. military aid flow to Pakistan, a country it sees as nurturing terrorism and hostility toward its sovereignty, begins to question the authenticity of its strategic partnership with the U.S. Meanwhile, Pakistan, sensing the U.S. tilting closer toward India on matters of trade, defense technology, and regional leadership, begins to see America as an unreliable partner. The U.S., caught in the middle, continues to pursue what it believes is balance, but what manifests instead is confusion. And confusion is the birthplace of conflict. Misalignment doesn't just occur between countries, it occurs within policy frameworks themselves. American policymakers often operate with different goals across different departments. The State Department might emphasize diplomacy and regional stability, while the Pentagon focuses on counterterrorism cooperation with Pakistan. Meanwhile, trade officials promote investment in India, and Congress voices concerns about human rights or press freedom in both nations. These cross-cutting objectives lead to contradictory messages. When foreign governments observe these inconsistencies, they respond not to the intention, but to the perceived action. And perceived action, if misaligned with declared goals, leads to mistrust. This misalignment is further compounded by the lack of a unified vision. A clear, long-term strategic framework for South Asia would require hard choices. Choices that define priorities rather than postpone them. Is the U.S. willing to reevaluate its dependency on Pakistan as a military partner? Is it ready to invest fully in a partnership with India that may challenge traditional dynamics with other regional powers? Without these questions being asked and answered at the highest levels, policy becomes reactive rather than intentional. And when policy reacts instead of leads, it mirrors the uncertainty within. At a higher level, misalignment is not just a political error, it's a reflection of a deeper principle. When your values and your actions do not match, tension is inevitable. Whether it's a person or a nation, the gap between what is said and what is done will eventually create consequences. The U.S. has often spoken of a free and open Indo-Pacific, of promoting democratic values, of building resilient supply chains and regional stability. But simultaneously, it is engaged in military transactions with regimes that contradict those ideals, has overlooked human rights violations when convenient, and has prioritized short-term stability over long-term integrity. These contradictions become visible in its alliances, and when nations observe these contradictions, they respond with suspicion and protectiveness, not partnership. The result is a cycle of friction. Each side feels it is being misrepresented or taken for granted. India sees a lack of conviction. Pakistan senses abandonment. and the U.S. becomes trapped in a position of managing crises it helped create. This is the mirror of misalignment, where conflict does not come from external forces alone, but from within the structure of the policy itself. The friction is not accidental. It is the inevitable byproduct of trying to serve two visions that are inherently incompatible without a greater integrative strategy. It is not enough to maintain two alliances. There must be a deeper alignment of values, strategies, and transparent expectations. When misalignment persists, conflict doesn't need to be manufactured. It arises naturally from the dissonance. Power follows clarity. In the realm of diplomacy and global influence, the strength of a nation's position is not just defined by its military might or economic capacity, but by the clarity of its vision and the consistency of its actions. When a country knows what it wants, understands the values it stands for, and communicates its intentions with precision, its influence becomes magnetic. Allies trust it, adversaries respect it, and the global order responds to its leadership. Conversely, when a nation's policies are clouded by ambiguity, contradiction, or hesitation, it begins to lose its gravitational pull. The United States, as a global superpower, sits at a crossroads in its South Asia strategy. Its influence in the region, particularly between Pakistan and India, is being shaped not by strength alone, but by how clearly it defines its long-term goals and strategic priorities. Clarity is not about choosing sides, it is about choosing direction. The U.S. has long tried to maintain a delicate balancing act between its relationship with Pakistan and its growing partnership with India. But over time, that balance has become increasingly difficult to sustain without a clear articulation of purpose. What does the U.S. truly seek in South Asia? Is the primary objective counterterrorism? Is it economic cooperation? Is it the containment of Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific? Or is it the promotion of democracy and stability across the region? Without clarity on these fundamental questions, every move becomes reactionary. Every diplomatic engagement, every military deal, every public statement becomes open to interpretation and misinterpretation. When there is a lack of clarity, trust erodes. India, observing the U.S. continuing its security cooperation with Pakistan, begins to question the depth of American commitment to their strategic partnership. Pakistan, noticing America's deeper economic and military ties with India, grows suspicious of Washington's intentions. The U.S., meanwhile, is left trying to explain its position in a language that often feels diplomatic but not decisive. This lack of clarity creates space for suspicion, and where suspicion grows, influence diminishes. Nations do not align with confusion, they align with certainty. Clarity breeds credibility, and credibility is the currency of global power. Clarity also provides consistency. When a nation operates from a well-defined strategy, it can respond to crises without wavering. It can align its military, economic, and diplomatic tools around a unified goal. Without this internal alignment, policies contradict each other. One department supports a democratic ally, while another negotiates with a military regime. One branch of government pushes for human rights reforms, while another signs arms deals with known violators. These inconsistencies are not just noticed by the world, they are remembered, and they shape long-term perceptions. Power begins to leak away, not because of a lack of intention, but because of a lack of integration. Moreover, clarity empowers communication. It allows leaders to speak with conviction, not just to the world, but to their own people. When a president or secretary of state addresses an issue like U.S.-Pakistan relations or U.S.-India defense cooperation, clarity enables them to explain the rationale with coherence. This in turn builds public support, strengthens alliances, and reassures markets and institutions. When there is no clarity, even the best-intentioned policies fall victim to political noise, media distortion, and public misunderstanding. Power follows clarity because people and nations are drawn to those who know where they're going. In the context of U.S. policy toward Pakistan and India, clarity must begin with an honest assessment of interests and values. It requires confronting outdated assumptions and recognizing the new geopolitical landscape. It demands transparency not only with allies but within American institutions. Without it, power will continue to be spent managing ambiguity, defending decisions made in confusion, and repairing trust that was eroded, not by malice, but by a failure to clearly define the path forward. True influence requires neutral integrity. In international relations, influence is not simply about dominance or strategic leverage. It is about the ability to lead through consistency, fairness, and principles that withstand shifting alliances and changing circumstances. When a global power such as the United States engages with multiple partners in a region marked by historical tension, such as Pakistan and India, its influence is measured not only by the scale of its involvement, but by the perception of its impartiality. Neutral integrity doesn't mean indifference or passivity. It means standing firm in values, applying them consistently, and ensuring that partnerships are shaped not by favoritism or convenience, but by a vision of shared progress and mutual respect. When the U.S. provides military aid or intelligence support to Pakistan, while simultaneously deepening strategic and economic ties with India, it operates within a space of dual commitment. The challenge arises when these commitments appear to contradict one another in practice or intent. India sees continued American support to Pakistan as a security risk and a signal of disregard for India's long-standing concerns about terrorism and regional instability. Pakistan, in turn, views U.S.-India cooperation, especially in defense and diplomacy, as a threat to its national interests and a potential imbalance in the region. Both perceptions stem from a belief that the U.S. cannot remain truly neutral, that it must eventually lean toward one side. This belief emerges when neutrality is confused with silence, or when values are inconsistently applied across different relationships. To maintain true influence, the U.S. must anchor its actions in integrity that is visible and predictable. It must hold each partner accountable to the same standards, whether those relate to democracy, human rights, counterterrorism, or regional cooperation. If the U.S. criticizes democratic backsliding in one country but ignores it in another for strategic convenience, it sends the message that principles are negotiable. When principles are negotiable, influence weakens, because allies no longer see the U.S. as a reliable compass, and adversaries see inconsistency as a vulnerability to exploit. The strength of American diplomacy does not lie in its ability to play both sides. It lies in its ability to elevate both sides by encouraging cooperation rooted in fairness, transparency, and common interests. Neutral integrity also enhances credibility. A nation that leads with clarity and fairness is trusted more, not less. Trust leads to stronger alliances, more meaningful dialogue, and a broader willingness to collaborate on complex issues. When countries know where the U.S. stands, not in terms of allegiance, but in terms of values and long-term vision, they can make more confident decisions about alignment, investment, and cooperation. Influence grows not from secrecy or strategy alone, but from a reputation for dependability. And dependability is born from consistently doing what one says, regardless of short-term political gains or pressures. In the case of South Asia, the U.S. has a unique opportunity to model what balanced leadership looks like in a region historically marked by division. That leadership cannot be built on symbolic gestures or transactional politics. It must be grounded in the kind of influence that comes from standing equally with both nations while holding firm to shared ideals. This includes facilitating dialogue, encouraging regional integration, and addressing security concerns with honesty and proportionality. It means being willing to confront uncomfortable truths in both partnerships and ensuring that support is not interpreted as endorsement of harmful policies or actions. The future of U.S. influence in South Asia depends not on how many deals it signs or how many bases it builds, but on whether it can sustain relationships that are principled and respected by all parties involved. Influence that is conditional, unclear, or biased does not last, but influence that emerges from neutral integrity, where each nation knows that the U.S. will act with fairness, transparency, and strategic foresight, creates the conditions for durable partnerships and regional stability. It signals a form of leadership that is not just powerful, but worthy of emulation. And that kind of influence carries weight far beyond the immediate theater of diplomacy. Energy grows where attention flows. In foreign policy, as in life, what we give consistent focus to begins to expand in significance, impact, and consequence. The United States has, for decades, maintained a deep focus on Pakistan, politically, militarily, and diplomatically. That attention, though often justified by immediate strategic needs, has created a dynamic where certain patterns repeat themselves, not because they are inevitable, but because they are continually reinforced through attention, investment, and policy inertia. By consistently channeling energy into the Pakistan relationship, especially through security and military frameworks, the U.S. has not only shaped its own expectations, but also the behavior and strategic calculations of Pakistan itself. Simultaneously, it has influenced how India views America's role in the region, often with increasing skepticism. The core principle here is that attention is not neutral. It is a form of reinforcement. When the U.S. continues to engage Pakistan primarily through military assistance, counterterrorism partnerships, and tactical cooperation, it reinforces a pattern where Pakistan is incentivized to maintain the very security dilemmas it claims to fight. The cycle becomes self-sustaining. The U.S. provides aid in response to instability, and that aid, intentionally or not, becomes a source of leverage that Pakistan uses to maintain relevance in Washington's strategic calculus. Meanwhile, India, watching these transactions, interprets them as a signal that the U.S. is not fully committed to regional stability or counterterrorism integrity, especially when groups targeting Indian interests continue to operate within Pakistani territory with minimal consequences. This dynamic does not emerge in a vacuum. It is the result of years of attention being directed toward short-term tactical gains rather than long-term strategic vision. During the Cold War, Pakistan was a gateway to contain Soviet influence. After 9/11, it became a logistical ally in the war in Afghanistan. In both cases, the U.S. concentrated its energy on immediate needs and transactional agreements. But while the context evolved, the pattern of attention remained the same. As a result, the partnership with Pakistan became entrenched in a framework that prioritized stability over transformation, cooperation over accountability, and tactical alignment over principled engagement. Attention, when misdirected or narrowly focused, can lead to unintended consequences. By continuing to view Pakistan through a military security lens, the U.S. has often overlooked the broader issues of governance, civil rights, and democratic development that are essential to long-term regional peace. And this selective focus has consequences. It not only limits the potential of the relationship with Pakistan, but also distorts the balance in the region. India, a rising global power with a stable democratic system and growing technological and economic strength, seeks a partnership with the U.S. that reflects shared values and a future-oriented agenda. But when it sees disproportionate attention flowing to Pakistan, especially in ways that overlook issues of extremism or state accountability, it begins to question whether the U.S. is truly aligned with its vision for the region. The deeper insight is that where attention flows, influence follows. If the U.S. shifts its focus toward building deeper, broader ties with India, based not just on countering China or balancing power, but on innovation, education, energy, trade, and cultural collaboration, that energy will begin to expand into more meaningful forms of partnership. Likewise, if attention toward Pakistan is recalibrated to support civilian institutions, democratic processes, and economic reforms, rather than just security frameworks, The nature of that relationship can evolve too. Attention must be intentional. It must reflect what the U.S. ultimately values and seeks to grow. Otherwise, energy will continue to flow into old patterns, reinforcing cycles of dependency, mistrust, and misalignment. The lesson is not to withdraw attention, but to redirect it consciously. Attention is a resource, and like any resource, where it is invested determines what grows. In South Asia, the U.S. has the opportunity to reassess where its energy has been flowing and to realign that energy with a vision of sustainable peace, mutual respect, and regional balance. By doing so, it can influence outcomes not through pressure or persuasion, but through the power of deliberate presence and principled engagement. Every policy is a story the world hears. In international affairs, actions are not isolated. They are narratives unfolding in front of global audiences, allies, adversaries, and domestic populations. The United States, with its vast reach and historical weight, crafts a story through every alliance it upholds, every aid package it delivers, and every silence it maintains. These stories matter because they shape how nations perceive intentions, define trust, and prepare for future engagement. In the case of its dual alignment with Pakistan and India, the U.S. is telling a complex, often conflicting story, one that can appear pragmatic in strategic terms, but confusing in moral clarity. And when the story lacks coherence, it begins to lose its persuasive power. Perception in diplomacy is as important as policy itself. The U.S. may believe it is maintaining a neutral stance, upholding strategic interests with both nations to ensure regional stability, yet the story perceived by India is often one of compromise, where national security concerns are deprioritized in favor of military ties with a state India associates with extremism and instability. Pakistan, meanwhile, interprets shifts toward deeper Indo-American collaboration as abandonment or containment. These perceptions fuel distrust, not because of any single act, but because of the overall narrative being constructed through repeated choices. The media, think tanks, policymakers, and political actors across both countries frame these actions within their own nationalistic or ideological. When military aid is delivered to Pakistan following diplomatic tensions, it's seen in India as a betrayal. When India signs a strategic technology agreement with the U.S., it is interpreted in Pakistan as a threat. These interpretations are then echoed in public discourse, media cycles, and political rhetoric, creating an atmosphere where every move is hyperanalyzed and frequently misunderstood. In this kind of environment, clarity of message is not just helpful, it's essential. If the U.S. seeks to be a stabilizing force in South Asia, it must pay attention, not just to the content of its policy, but to the story that policy tells. Stories are not made of statistics, military logistics, or internal memos. They are made of patterns, symbols, and consistency. Does the U.S. truly support democratic values when it continues to arm a military that has historically overthrown elected governments? Does it truly stand with counterterrorism efforts when it avoids direct language about extremist safe havens? These are not just policy inconsistencies. They are narrative fractures, and they weaken the story that the U.S. wants the world to believe. A coherent narrative is one where values and interests align. It is one where partnerships reflect mutual benefit and mutual respect, and where decisions reflect long-term strategy rather than short-term tactics. In this context, both Pakistan and India would benefit from a U.S. narrative that is principled, honest, and transparent. Such a narrative might acknowledge historical complexities while affirming future aspirations. It might call for reforms without imposing them. It might promote peace while preparing for security. And most importantly, it would do so in a language that is consistent across administrations, not rewritten every election cycle. Narratives are not controlled by declarations. They are earned by behavior. If the U.S. consistently acts with fairness, consistency, and clarity, the story it tells will gradually shift from one of contradiction to one of leadership. That story will shape not only its relationships in South Asia, but its global reputation as a partner that can be counted on not just in crisis, but in the pursuit of a shared vision. The trust that grows from such a narrative becomes an asset more valuable than any treaty or arms deal because it underwrites all future cooperation. When the story is clear, strong, and principled, even difficult choices become more understandable, and influence expands not through power, but through meaning.